John, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I know we've been able to chat uh, briefly offline and talk through some of your experiences and your journey, but I do want to share that story with the listeners today. So before we jump into it, I do want to hand it over to you, share a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, and what are you hoping to get out of the conversation today?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, Furkan. This is for me, my current place in life, in the world, the universe is I run an online nonprofit spiritual community. I'm a spiritual guide and a seeker and a student as well. And I'm looking to help people help themselves find their wholeness within, even if they don't see it, find the light and have a platform where people can share their journeys and stuff. But it was a long road to get here for me. I
Mhm.
grew up in a small town in rural Oklahoma. I joined the army straight out of high school, skipped college, and that was right before 9/11. So I probably spent out of the first 15 years of my adult life, I spent 11 or 12 of those years in Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan at war in combat zones. And I was a counterintelligence special agent, and I loved my job. I was good at my job. I believed in what we were doing.
Mm.
And then the longer I was in that military industrial complex machine, the more I saw that it was this kind of dark thing and that we're all just humans trying to live our lives. And that got to me. And so when I left my job after 15 years and went back home, lost and didn't really know who I was, didn't have an identity. And I had to heal and I didn't really know how. And that was about 7 years after I got home before I finally, about 2.5 years ago, had this spiritual kind of moment of understanding or clarity. People call it awakening, call it different
Yeah.
things. So that's the cliff notes.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing that. I guess just starting off from the beginning of the story, I just want to explore a little bit. What was that experience like? And you were very young coming out of high school and joining the army. So what was going on for you, if you can recall at the time, to know that, hey, I'm signing up for this thing? And I think for a lot of people, there's that sense of patriotism that doing something for my country. But what was your experience like?
I think that was part of it. I believed that I was doing something that was important, and I wanted to do, I had always wanted to do counterterrorism, and I wanted to go figure out why people did terrorist attacks, and I ended up being able to do counterterrorism as part of my job. So that was part of my motivation. I had watched Lawrence of Arabia as a kid, and that had fascinated me, and I'd always been fascinated with the Middle East and the Arab culture, and I read Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy books growing up, and that fascinated me too. So being part of the intelligence community was something that I wanted to do. And so I was an idealistic kid. Yeah, I was I wanted to make the world a better place. It was my intent.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you joined and were dispatched, and you said you spent 11 years out there, Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan, what did you learn about those cultures and what did you see? And did you understand why these terrorist acts were occurring?
That's a great question. And yes, I came to understand the people, just the regular civilian people that are out and about in those worlds, and became familiar with their culture and their beliefs. And it made sense to me. I realized they're just people just like us. To the quote unquote enemy, I didn't ever find a justification for what they were doing purely, but I saw their point of view, if that makes sense. So I understood why they did what they did because I think my job a lot of times was to essentially find these people, to essentially hunt these people. And so when you become a hunter and you're hunting someone, you have to almost become them, right? You almost have to like think like them. And find their perspective. And so I think when you do that, it's this very jarring thing. It was a very damaging thing too, because then you do understand that they have families, they have children, they went to school and college and they have lives and not all of them, but some of them truly believed in what they were doing.
Mm,
No less or no more than what I think soldiers believe in what they're doing. And the means don't justify the ends, but at the same time, neither does what we're doing on the Western military side of things. Yeah, I found it a very complicated situation.
mhm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think the actions can ever be justified, but the
Yeah.
rationale behind it, you at least appreciate it without saying, "Oh, I agree with what they're doing." And I think we're seeing that in the current conflicts too, especially in the Middle East right now. There's a lot of divisiveness right now
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
polarization around war is needed. There's a reason behind that, very much similar to what you've shared with your experience. But I think what's getting lost in is understanding, okay, why are some of these things happening without saying, okay, they're correct or they're justified. Why are some of these attacks and is war necessary? The answer. And one of the things you did touch on was being out there. It was fairly dark. What about it was dark? Besides the obviously you're taking lives, right? And there's a sheer number of casualties that unfortunately take place, but outside of that, or was it all associated with that?
It was that, but it's also you realize you're in this machine. Be traumatic for them. And then you realize the machine is eating up the civilians in the middle, like the innocent people that didn't do anything on either side. They're just victims of the circumstances. And then you realize the machine's also eating up yourself. It's also eating up your brothers and sisters in arms around you and all these people that are part of this machine with you. And it's chewing you up too. It's chewing them up. So it's the enemy that you start to see this is a waste. We're killing these people. It's tough to see we're capturing these people. We're splitting up families. Civilians are dying and being displaced. And then you watch the people around you go through trauma and some of them don't make it out because they get attacked and then they are victims of an attack or they make it out physically, but then they don't make it out mentally and they take their own lives later on down the road. So you see that happen and then you also understand in that darkness, you're like, here's why we're told that we're here. And then you start to objectively understand that war is this political thing, regardless of what war you're in is political. You know that. And then you start to ask yourself, especially if you're there for a long I think soldiers or airmen, you sailors, Marines, or even civilians that are there for longer periods of time start to ask, why are we here? And then the answer is there's no real good answer. And then you start to question what it's worth from the cost on all sides. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. And you're talking about the machine as you were referring to it. There's this whole argument that we have the right to defend ourselves, right? Like we were attacked and we have to defend ourselves. How much of that do you buy into that?
I can say that's a good question, and I always caveat with I'm a spiritualist now, I'm out of politics, but I can go back and talk about the geopolitical situation back then.
Yeah.
After 9/11, Al Qaeda attacked us. It's pretty cut and dry. There's conspiracy theories. They don't hold, I don't think, a whole lot, but maybe we knew about it and didn't do as much as we should to stop it. I buy into that. But it happened. It wasn't just Al Qaeda. Pretty much every major terrorist group on the planet had a presence in Afghanistan. And that's why when after 9/11 we had so much goodwill in the world to go into Afghanistan because it wasn't just a US problem. It was Europe, it was North Africa, it was the Horn of Africa, it was Southeast Asia with Abu Sayyaf and the Southeast Islamic terrorist group. Every country in the world was happy for Afghanistan to not be a problem for them anymore. And so with that we were attacked, we were gonna go fix the problem. I think that was fairly justifiable from an objective point of view.
Mhm.
It wasn't gonna stop. The
Right.
violence was going to continue happening, and so I think that in and of itself, in a very limited manner, was a justifiable, almost necessary reaction to what happened in 9/11. I don't think people who weren't alive during 9/11 can't really grasp we lived it, but can't grasp the gravity of that situation when it happened. The world stopped turning, especially in America. So, I will say Iraq never should have happened. That was not justifiable in any way, shape, or form, and probably the second and third order effects of that were giving the collapse of Syria, probably Libya, probably the Egyptian, uh, unrest that happened, and all the things that happened in that region likely don't happen if we don't invade Iraq. We created ISIS. ISIS didn't exist if we don't invade Iraq. So we literally created ISIS, and it started out as Al Qaeda in Land Between Two Rivers, which would have ever formed if we hadn't been there. So yeah, Iraq was not justifiable in any shape or form.
Yeah, and that's the more popular view now, in hindsight, right? And in the moment, perhaps we can always hindsight's 2020. We can always look back and say, "Oh, this should have happened," and all that. But the other piece touched on here is the aspect of identity, right? So you came back, you're struggling with identity. Now, I do want to come back to that, but I do want to ask another question related to identity. When you are vocally saying that you disagree perhaps with that approach of going into Iraq, how do you feel like some of the people that you did go with and were dispatched with, how would they feel? Or did they have a different view? Like, how's that come together for you, and how do you reconcile with that?
That's a really good question, and that's a question that I don't think I've ever been asked on any show I've been on, and so I appreciate that. I think a lot of people that go to war, that I went to war with, they don't feel like I feel because they want to believe that it meant something more than it did. And there's a few and I think there's a level of empathy that plays into it,
Mm.
that if you allow that empathy to show up, because then it harms you. So you open yourself up to harm. If you open yourself up to it means less or it meant less or that we were hurting people, that opens yourself up to harm.
Mm.
And so the mind doesn't want that to happen. And so the mind's gonna and a lot of people shut that off. And so I think there's an empathy level. There's probably an intelligence level, like how smart someone is going to depend on how they see it and how it went. And they're going to be more prone to believe what they were told or not question what they were told. So I'd say for a lot of people that I went to war with, they're not going to be able to be as introspective about it. Some of them are. I think a large, huge amount of people for those various reasons are going to say, I'm not going to be introspective about this because it opens up too much
Yeah.
stuff.
And I think we saw that quite a bit during the pandemic too, where people's worldviews were basically challenged, and others, there were some people that who openly accepted that challenge, even though I think their world keep crashing down on them at times because you've been led to believe a certain thing, and all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath your feet, right? And that could be problematic for a lot of people. And that's why you see a lot of the psychological issues people experience. Because again, there's that disconnect of what reality is and what you actually believe reality to be. And I agree with you, right? It's hard to face that truth. It's easier to avoid it, even deceive ourselves. But was that something that factored in? So now coming back to that identity crisis that you experienced, coming back and trying to reintegrate into some sort of normalcy, whatever that may be. Yeah.
It, yeah, I was for me, yes, I was going through that process of questioning everything I had done, and at the same time, having been addicted to what I did. So, like, people, whether you're an extreme athlete or professional sports or whatever, like, even medical professionals or first responders or whoever. There's all kinds of professions where you get honed in on this thing, you're so focused on it. Even driven professionals and can get can get addicted to what they do. So I was addicted to war. I was addicted to the I lived on an air base and there were always planes taking off and helicopters, and getting attacked was exciting. Inbound rockets or missiles or a truck bomb goes off, it's exciting. It starts to make you feel alive. And then if you don't have all that stuff, then you don't feel alive. And so for me, I came home and I didn't feel alive. I didn't feel and I said I was really good at my job. I told men and women where to go capture people and where to drop bombs, and I told airplanes where to go and what to like, I thought of myself not in an egoistic way necessarily, but I was an important person. I did important things, and that was exciting.
Yeah.
And then that's all gone, so you question everything that you did, and then you're simultaneously missing what you did. That's complicated in and of itself. And so I'm struggling with that. So I've got PTSD, anxiety, OCD, hypervigilance, depression. From the mental side, my brain's been physiologically rewired from a biochemical perspective. And my physiologically, I have Gulf War syndrome. I have sleep apnea, I have a migraine. So I'm physiologically, my physical body is also busted up. So I was a shattered human being from top to bottom.
Yeah. And what were you able to then do about it? So I know you've talked about the spiritual aspect, but it sounds like there was a 5-year gap, right, in between you coming back and finding the spiritual path or awakening, as you mentioned it. So how were you able to get through those? Do I have the timeline correct? Was it
About 7 years, but yeah, it's about 7 years, yeah. But I didn't know how to heal. I knew I needed to, but I couldn't wrap myself around. I went to the VA and asked for help was one of the things I did about 5 months, 6 months after being home. And I had a VA therapist who was into Eastern modalities like mindfulness meditation and, some of that stuff, and she taught it to me, and it helped. I wasn't really able to wrap myself around it because I was too injured,
Mm.
but it did, I think, start things rolling in my mind down the hill that would eventually take shape. So that helped. I I went to a lot of counseling, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week there for a long time. I cried a lot,
Yeah.
and I and time helps. Time does heal,
Mm.
and before I had my spiritual moment, I did come to a moment with myself from a practical perspective. It wasn't a spiritual thing. It probably was. I just didn't know it at the
Mhm.
time. I said, I need to let go. I'm too attached to what's happening tomorrow. I'm too attached to what happened yesterday or 10 years ago or 5 years. So I surrendered in this like really peaceful sort of way
Mhm.
and completely let go. And I believe that opened me up for my spiritual understanding. And I wasn't on a spiritual path prior to that. But I think that letting go was critical to healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And just along those lines, because a lot of the times you come back home and you're still in contact with other members of the army that you were out there with. Were there other people that you knew that were struggling and perhaps weren't as fortunate as you or weren't able to figure it out? And what was that like? Just firsthand experience.
That's difficult. Yeah, I know people that weren't able to find their way out and took their own lives. And I know people that are still in it and can't get out of it and are completely in the darkness still. And so, yeah, it's and I would, yeah, and I was over there for so long. I was all those years that I know all these people, like from all the, because we would get new rotations of people in every 6 months. So I'm meeting a whole new group of people every 6 months for years. So yeah, I know a lot of people and that have gone through this. And so, yeah, it is difficult to see those other people hurting and not finding their way.
Yeah. And then I think there's so many layers to a spiritual journey and everyone's is different. And we all come to it at different times in our lives. We navigate through it in different ways. We have a different view on it, how we approach it. So for you, how did it all come together and how have you been able to use this connection or awakening as whatever we want to call it to your own benefit? How do you maintain that? So I know there's a few questions in there, but yeah.
Sure. For me, since I wasn't on a spiritual path that I was cognizant of when it happened, I didn't understand the vocabulary and the constructs of it all. I hadn't studied it a lot. So when it happened, I needed to understand it. Like I had this moment of clarity, this moment of understanding that I felt this oneness of everything in the world, a very loving kindness kind of situation. But I wanted to be able to put that in context as a human, as a person. And so I read a ton of books. I think I read 60 books in 4 months. And I read everything I could from around the world, from across time, and not just religion, spirituality, philosophy, self help. And so that helped me a ton. It helped find myself. And one of the things that I had understood in my awakening moment, I understood what my higher purpose was, or my dharma. I understood my higher purpose in life was to help people help themselves, to go create this online nonprofit digital community where people could have authentic, meaningful connection and all that kind of stuff. So, like, finding my purpose was huge because now suddenly I'm living my purpose every single day. That's a huge thing, right? That's the biggest thing, I think, maybe. And that makes it easier. That made life easier because suddenly today, every day, I'm a more in alignment of my mind, body, soul, and and so I learned all this other stuff so that I could talk to people about it, whether they were Christian, Hindu, New Age spiritualists, atheists, whatever. It doesn't matter. I want to be able to talk to anyone about spirituality, about the universe, about even scientists if they want to talk about consciousness, whatever. It's all the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that purpose thing is so important here because I think what I'm hearing from you in terms of your experience coming back and trying to integrate yourself, there's probably that purpose piece lacking, right? You had purpose when you were at war
Yeah.
and then you come back and there's no purpose there. And to be able to recognize that there is something meaningful in your life that you're doing, and you've been able to put that towards the work you're doing with this non-for-profit. But that's the biggest thing I think where people lost and feel like there's no way out, or either they're struggling with depression is they're not able to find that sense of purpose. And it doesn't mean that you have to have it all figured out at once or you have to be working towards that purpose consistently every day. I think even 1% that you can contribute towards it is can be meaningful, right? And you're obviously
Yeah.
going to have tough days and you have to navigate through that. So is that kind of what has happened for you?
Yeah. You absolutely really encapsulated it all there. That's exactly it. And I love that you talk about we don't have to live our whole purpose all at one time. If we're living part of our purpose more today than we were yesterday, that's a beautiful thing. And yeah, finding something that was meaningful and that plugged me back into the world and connected me with everything in the world was this great thing. And if we're living our purpose, we're going to be connected to everything around us more, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how So it's you answered that question, but in a more general perspective, like how do you maintain that sense of spiritual connection or oneness, as you said, on a daily basis? Like, because I know for me, sometimes it's easy to get lost in this world, right? You've got commitments, you've got responsibilities, you got bills to pay. Sometimes those responsibilities create stresses. There's difficult people around us that may be projecting their hurt onto us, or we might not be in a good state. And it's tough, right? And I have to constantly center myself and remind myself that, okay, what's the bigger picture here? And sometimes I forget. So I'm just curious what it's like for you.
No, that's a great way to put it, right? Like, we life happens and we get lost in it, and that's what I try to remind myself, that I'm on a spiritual path, I'm on a spiritual journey, it's this beautiful thing, but at the same time, it very much intersects every day with the real world and the concrete reality we all share together and move around in, and so, how do I merge those 2 things? And I think that's the essence of spirituality for each person, and that's gonna be fiercely independent. What works for someone's not gonna work for the next person, but figure out what it is for you. Be What spiritual ideas, philosophies work for you, and how do you then bridge that gap from the real world you're in to that spiritual self on the other side? So, I think ritual does that. And that can be I think ritual is not a bad word. Sometimes it gets affiliated with religious connotations, but all ritual is a bridge between the real world and your spiritual self. And that can be meditation. It often is reflection, prayer. People call it different things. It could be saying things to yourself, affirmations. It could be a lot of different things. There's all kinds of rituals from around the world. And you can make your own ritual up. You can take all this stuff from around the world and see what works best for you. And maybe it's for some people, it's candles and incense. It could be stones or rocks. It could be walking beside a lake in a park. The question is, what connects you to something that is deep inside you, if you believe that, or beyond into the universe, the divine, or Christ consciousness, or the Brahman, however you want to call it? What is that? How do you make that connection? And how does that make you feel? And does that bring you peace? Does it bring you calm? And does it make you happier? Does it make you live a more joyful, light life? And I think ritual is part of that. And I think there's what goes along with that too. There's intention and awareness.
Mm.
Are we living life intentionally and aware, or are we letting life live us? And then we're living society's life. We're living a life that's been given to us that's not going to be a one size fits all situation. So, like, when society gives us this life to live, it's going to be this like frumpy, not very well fitting outfit that that's not going to do much for us.
No, and there's a couple of things that came to me as you were sharing that. The one is, I think at the end of the day, we need to be comfortable in with connecting to ourselves. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of issues because everyone's so disconnected, right? As much as we like to think we're digitally connected, we're disconnected and we're not connecting with ourselves. And I think that's where that spiritual practice or ritual, as you said, can be valuable because it gives you an opportunity to disconnect from everything going on around you, all the chaos, and go inward. And that's where, at least for me, I've been able to find that divine presence in my life. The other piece you were touching on, geez, I lost my thought there. But yeah, that was the one thing that for sure that came up for me that I did wanted to shed some light on. And I just also want to take some time to understand about your not for profit and yeah, what is it all about and what are you doing with it?
Yeah, we wanted to create, like I said, a place where people could share their journeys and we could share our journeys. And whether you were a Hindu or a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist, New Age spiritualist, you'd be able to practice your own faith or in spiritual philosophy alongside other people and feel open and free about that. And maybe we could help one another out, inform aspects of this, that, or the other. And if someone doesn't know what their spirituality is, they can come and get an idea of what it is without being told this is what it should be. Because I think it's important for people to figure out and be empowered within themselves. And so we wanted to create a place that was like that. We needed a name, so we called our spiritual community Kishar, which is the Sumerian goddess of Mother Earth or Gaia, which is this calm, peaceful thing. And it also represents the line on the horizon, which is that journey that we're all on, even if we don't know it. We're all on a journey. Um, and we wanted a place where you could come and have a conversation, chat back and forth during the day on a mobile app and or on your desktop computer, and we can have Zoom calls and have roundtable discussions just like you and I are talking right now. And have after daily affirmations, guided meditations, just stuff that helps people have conversations and maybe be more centered and grounded within themselves. And also how that spiritual journey, like we were talking about earlier, intersects with our day to day lives, makes us centered and grounded. So we're more apt to have time and space to be spiritual
Mhm.
and have that alignment in mind, body, soul. So that's what we work to create. We've been working on it for 2.5 years. And we also offer individual spiritual guidance and coaching, and all the funds from community membership or the one-on-one stuff, it all goes back into the community to benefit members. And we're just trying to build something and help people. We really want people to help themselves and make the world a better place, trying to give back to the world.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and I appreciate that. And what's been the response like? How are people responding to this, and what are they providing as feedback?
We've gotten really good feedback that it helps people connect with themselves. It helps people connect with each other. People say, oh, this doesn't have to be a lonely journey. This doesn't have to be something I have to do on my own. A spiritual path can be a light thing. It doesn't have to be dark. Sometimes it will be, but that's okay. And then maybe you have support in that. And so we're getting good feedback. We're growing, and it's good to see because this is a labor of love. It's passion. I run this community with my wife. She was overseas with me all those years. We had a very similar job. We have another friend of ours, a woman from the Balkans who grew up in war in the Balkans and in Bosnia, and she spent time with us in Afghanistan. That's where we met. She helps us run the community. She's a founder of it as well. And so, yeah, we're moving it forward and trying to get the message out and keep trying to find and grow our audience.
That's very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and I remember what I was gonna say earlier, but it was around just the spiritual journey, right? As you were touching on here. And I think a lot of the times we get lost on what's the right way to do it, or can I read a book about it? And what I've come to realize is that you have to almost go through life. You have to experience certain things. You have to overcome certain challenges, and that can vary for people. Obviously, it's all relative. But once you're able to experience these things in life, I think it brings you to a moment where either you're willing to accept things for what they are and recognize this is part of your journey and there's an opportunity here to grow and make something out of it, or you can continue to resist it. And you can resist it for however long you want. Some people resist it for their whole lives. And sometimes it just keeps getting, the message keeps getting bigger and bigger until you finally uh, surrender to it. And that's kind of what I've come to realize. But there's no one way of getting there. And what I appreciate about what you've shared with the community is it can often feel lonely, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm having these ideas, I'm having these thoughts, but I really don't have anyone to talk to about it. And you almost feel like you're going crazy. So that's why I appreciate that you guys have created this community where people can connect with others and try to make sense of what might be going on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's what it's all about is spirituality and being in touch with yourself, even if you don't consider overtly to be spiritual, right? Getting in touch with yourself is hard. And you talked about it earlier when you do that medit reflection and you do ritual, you start to have to like look at some parts of yourself, and that can be difficult. It can be noisy. It can be uncomfortable. So we have to getting through that initial part and breaking through to the other side for that initial perspective. That can be very difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So now you've gone through your own experience with war, and then you come back, integrated back into your life, and now you're created the space for other people to be able to connect with themselves, find meaning in their lives. What are your thoughts now, if you're open to sharing, around some of the conflict we're seeing in the world? And if you had any message, what would your message be?
I would say the first thing that people need to understand before anything is that we're all just human. It doesn't matter what race we are and what we look like, what color we are, what sex we are. It doesn't none of that matters. Like, we're all just humans, and we all know what it's like to be human because we all have lived this life that can be very difficult sometimes and very troubling, very hard. We don't like bad things or hurtful things or negative things to happen to us. We're very offended when it does. We're very upset when it does. So I think we have to realize we're all human and that we have to humanize these people all around the world. So whether you're let's just say Gaza and Israel, whether you're pro Palestine or you're pro Israel, try to be pro human and say Hamas shouldn't have killed those Israelis and those Israelis shouldn't have killed those thousands of innocent Palestinians. And in Ukraine, in Russia, like from a geopolitical view, I'm out of politics now, but there's been a part of me that I've had to let go of. But I'm I got really upset that Russia invaded Ukraine and did what it did. But all those young Russian men are dying. They didn't probably sign up for that, really. They're conscripts, and it's horrible what's happening to the Ukrainian people. And then you've got conflicts that aren't as well known that people don't talk about as much, like Myanmar or Burma that's been in war for 20, 30 years. And people don't talk about that. And so I would say one, conflict's always going to happen right now because we're not advanced as a human consciousness enough right now to not do that. So it is part of life. Hopefully we can evolve beyond that someday. But everyone's human. And we need to let go of these nationalistic tribes that we cling to. I love that I was born in America and the tremendous opportunity that it's given me, and I'm thankful for that. I have gratitude for that. I have deep gratitude for that. But I can't be a nationalist. I can still love my country, but then I can say, "Hey, I'm not down to be a patriot in some way that causes war or conflict around the world." And I think just understanding that I think gratitude does come into play here. I like that I mentioned that because I think we have to be grateful for what we have. And if we're sitting here grateful for what we have, how can we be so angry about these other people around the world? How can we have this judgment?
Yeah.
And regardless of what religion you're in, whether it's Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism, they all preach non judgment. So I think we have to go out in the world and we have to live in non judgment. It's easy for us to judge all these different nation states or these organizations, like these terrorist groups as they're called or whatever they are, freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them. It's easier for us to judge all these different entities. But if we just sit in non-judgment and say, "Oh, we're all human," then we can make the world a better place. But really the only thing that we can do, and I would tell people this when it comes to thinking about conflict. If you're going to get angry and upset and all this, what are you doing to make the world a better place today? Not for yourself and not for your immediate family, but what are you doing today to make the world a better place for other people, for anyone else besides yourself? I would ask that question every single day. And the best thing that I can come up with is I have to love myself first, because if I don't love myself first, then everything else is futile.
Right.
And then once I love myself, I've got to go, that will lift up the whole world around me, but I have to love my neighbor. Because my neighbor and I, regardless of what we think about from a worldview perspective, we have 90% in common. We want happy, healthy communities and children to be successful and happy. And then we want education and we want security. So why are we going to get so wrapped around the axle about that 10%?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. And the biggest thing is what I've come to realize, and I try to remind myself quite often, is we tend to judge others based on what we don't like about ourselves, right? So a
That's true.
lot of this conflict is inner conflict. It's projected out. See it everywhere. It's unfortunate. And I agree with you. We need to have that sense of gratitude, not only for how good things are, but to even be alive and be here, right? And thinking about probability it takes for a human to come into existence and that we're here can really shape things and allow us to see from a different perspective. And going back to that sense of oneness, like you said, right? How can I see a part of me in you and vice versa, connect on that front? But I do appreciate everything you've shared, and I agree with you. I know we have a long ways to go as far as the human consciousness goes based on what we're seeing, but it's good to be able to talk to people like yourself and know that we're all doing our part, that will continue to bring others along. But is there anything else, John, that you wanted to touch on that we haven't talked about yet or could be of value to the listeners?
I always try to tell people that we have more time than we think. We really do. Have way more time in the day than we think that we do, and in the week, and the months, and the years. So use it, enjoy it, don't take it for granted, and don't try to be perfect. Don't chase perfection in the real world. We probably have this perfect thing inside, whether it's ourself or the divine or however you see it. That's probably perfect. But in this real world that we're all sharing, perfection doesn't exist. So don't try to be perfect. And then goes back to I always say at the end, I always try at the end is self love. That's what it starts and ends with is loving yourself, and you got to do it like un unashamedly, without reservation and wholly. You got to love yourself.
Appreciate that. I agree. Listeners want to find some of the work you're doing or get a hold of you. What are some ways they can do that?
Our main website is kishar.org. It's KISHAR.org. And that's the entrance to our community and our individual spiritual guidance and coaching stuff. Our social handles are usually at Kishar Spiritual most of the time. Instagram, find us on Facebook and all the other socials. And we have a pretty cool YouTube channel called At Peace on Your Journey. And we just try to put useful, helpful content out there for people. And if that can help them, great. And it's there. And yeah, come check us out. And I'm always around. You can DM me on Instagram or you can send me an email from our website and, and we can have a conversation and talk about it.
Great. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes for the listeners to find. But John, thank you again. This was a pleasure and appreciate you sharing your story and being vulnerable. Thank you again. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for having me on for a comment. I really appreciate the message that you're putting out in the world too. Like it's important and it's good to see other people out there lifting the world up.
I appreciate that. Thanks.